Welcome to Audiobook 365 Stories.
And now, where was Mary? Job would have felt better if he could see her because he was very worried about her. Many times that long night, he blamed her and himself, her for being stubborn, and himself for being weak and giving in when she insisted on following and finding Will. Mary did not sleep that night, just like Job. But she was in a safe house with kind, though rough people. She did not fight when the old boatman grabbed her arm to make sure she followed him through the busy docks and strange small streets. She followed him quietly, hardly thinking about where she was going and feeling relieved that someone else was making decisions for her. He took her to an old, very small house that looked like it belonged in the countryside, even though it was in the middle of a busy street. He pulled her into the house and, happy that he didn't lose her on the way, he said, "There," and gave her a big pat on the back. The room was bright and woke Mary up. Maybe the pat on the back helped too. She felt shy about explaining why she was there to a small old woman who was busy by the fireplace when they came in. The boatman didn't explain anything. He just sat in his chair, chewing tobacco and looking at Mary with a happy and proud face, as if she was his prize and also daring her to leave. The old woman, his wife, stood still with the poker in her hand, waiting to know who her husband had brought home so suddenly. As she stared in surprise, Mary's cheek turned red, then white. Her eyes went blurry, and she grabbed the dresser for support in the hot, spinning room, then fell to the floor. Both the man and his wife quickly helped Mary. They lifted her up, but she was still unconscious. The man held her up on one knee while his wife went to get some cold, fresh water. She threw the water on Mary, making her gasp, but her eyes stayed closed and her face was very pale. "Who is she, Ben?" asked the woman as she rubbed Mary's limp hands. "How should I know?" her husband answered roughly. Well, in a gentle voice, like talking to upset children and half to herself, "I just thought you might know since you brought her home." Poor thing. We shouldn't ask about her, but just help her. I wish I had my smelling salts, but I lent them to Mrs. Burton at church last Sunday because she couldn't stay awake during the sermon. Oh dear, she is so white. "Here, you hold her up a bit," said her husband. She did what he asked, still talking softly to herself, not minding his short, sharp words. To her old, loving heart, even his gruff words were precious, because he had been her husband for many years. Even though he was rough, he secretly felt comforted by her voice, but he would never show his hidden love if he could help it. "What's he doing?" she said, bending over Mary to support her drooping head. "Taking my pen that I've had for over 5 years. Oh my, he's burning it. I see now. He knows what he's doing. Burnt feathers are always good for someone who fainted. But it doesn't wake her up. Poor girl. Now what's he doing next? Well, he is smart, my old man. I never thought of that," she exclaimed as he brought out a bottle of strong drink called Golden Wasser from a cupboard. "That'll do," she said as the drink he poured into Mary's mouth made her start and cough. "Bless him. It's just like him to be so caring and thoughtful." "Not at all," he growled, Feeling relieved as Mary's color came back, her eyes opened, and she looked around sensibly. Not at all. I was never such a fool before. His wife helped Mary to stand up and placed her in a chair. All's right now, young woman? Asked the boatman, worried. Yes, sir, and thank you. I don't really know how to thank you, Mary said softly. Forget about your thanks. He shook himself, took his pipe, and went out without another word, leaving his wife very puzzled about who Mary was. Mary watched the boatman leave, then turned her sad eyes to the face of her hostess. She tried weakly to stand up, thinking she should leave, though she didn't know where to go. No, whoever you are, you're not well enough to go out into the street. Maybe lowering her voice a bit, you're a bad one. I almost think so, because you're so pretty. Well, it's the bad ones who have broken hearts. For sure, good people never get completely down. They always have hope in the Lord. It's the sinful who bear the worst grief in their broken hearts. Poor souls. We should pity and help them the most. She won't leave the house tonight, no matter who she is. Even if she's the worst woman in Liverpool, she won't leave. I wish I knew where the old man found her. Mary listened weakly to this talk and tried to explain in broken sentences. I'm not a bad one, Mrs. Really. Your husband took me out to sea after a ship that had sailed. There was a man in it who might save a life at the trial tomorrow. The captain wouldn't let him come, but he says he'll come back in the pilot boat. She started crying as she thought about her fading hopes, and the old woman tried to comfort her, starting with her usual. Well, he'll come back, I'm sure. I know he will. So keep your heart up. Don't worry about it. He's sure to be back. Oh, I'm afraid. I'm so afraid he won't, cried Mary, feeling a bit better because of the woman's words, even though she knew they might not be true. Still talking half to herself and half to Mary, the old woman made some tea and urged Mary to eat and refresh herself. But Mary shook her head at the offered food and only drank a cup of tea eagerly. The strong drink had made her feel very hot, and every sense was painfully clear, while her head ached terribly. She didn't like speaking because she felt like she couldn't control her words. She used completely different words from what she meant. So she stayed quiet while Mrs. Sturgis, that was the hostess's name, kept talking, put away the tea things, and moved around a lot, which made Mary's dizziness worse. She felt like she should leave for the night and go. But where? Soon, the old man came back, angrier and grumpier than before. He kicked aside the dry shoes his wife had prepared for him and grumbled at everything she said. Mary thought this was because he found her still there and gathered her strength to try to leave the house. But she was wrong. After a while, he said, looking right into the fire, as if talking to it, "Wind's against them." "Oh, is it?" said his wife, who knew him well and knew that his grumpiness came from some hidden worry. "Well, the wind often changes at night. There's time before morning. I bet it has changed since you looked." She looked out of their small window at a weather vane nearby, shining in the moonlight. Being a sailor's wife, she quickly saw that the wind was still unfavorable. She sighed and went back into the room, trying to think of another way to comfort Mary. Is there no one else who can prove what you need at the trial tomorrow? She asked. No one, answered Mary. And you have no clue who the real guilty person is if the other one is not? Mary did not answer, but started trembling all over. Mr. Sturgis saw this. Don't bother her with your questions, he said to his wife. She needs to go to bed. She's shivering from the sea air. I'll check the wind and the weather vane again. The tide will help when it changes. Mary went upstairs, thanking and blessing those who took in the stranger. Mrs. Sturgis led her into a little room that smelled of the sea and foreign places. There was a small bed for one son who was going to China, and a hammock above it for another son who was now in the Baltic Sea. The sheets looked like they were made from sailcloth, but were fresh and clean. On the wall were two rough drawings of ships with names written underneath. The mother looked at them and her eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away with the back of her hand. In a cheerful tone, she assured Mary the bed was well aired. I cannot sleep, thank you. I will sit here, if you please, said Mary, sinking down on the window seat. Come now, said Mrs. Sturgis. My husband told me to see you to bed, and I must. What's the use of watching? A watched pot never boils, and I see you are watching that weather vane. I try never to look at it, or I could do nothing else. My heart often feels sick when the wind rises, but I turn away and work and try not to think about the wind. Let me stay up a little, pleaded Mary, as her hostess seemed determined to get her to bed. Her looks won her plea. Well, I suppose I must. I will hear about it downstairs, I know. He'll be worried until you are in bed, I know. So you must be quiet if you are set on staying up. Quietly and silently, Mary watched the unchanging weather vane through the night. She sat on the little window seat, holding back the curtain that shaded the room from the bright moonlight outside. Her head rested against the corner of the window frame, her eyes burning and stiff from staring. The rosy morning light came up on the horizon, casting a red glow into the room. It was the morning of the trial day.